All right, government students, this is lesson 2 of unit 2, so that's 2.2 virtual notes. Let's go ahead and get started. Here are what we're going to be covering today. We're looking at the powers of Congress, what are the constitutional qualifications, and what are some of the non-legislative powers that each house has. Okay? The House of Representatives is where we're going to start. That's the larger of the two houses. It's currently made up of 435 members. That number is set by Congress, not by the Constitution. Early on in our history, that number was a lot smaller. That's basically how it's been for the past 100 years or so. It's been set at 435 members. How that's divided up though amongst the states is all going to be based off your state's population. Remember, we called that proportional representation. We get that idea from the Virginia Plan as a part of the Connecticut Compromise or the Great Compromise, where the House is going to reflect the population of a state. So the more people you have living in a state, the larger that state's population is going to be. So California, as the new census takes over, is going to have 52 representatives in the House of Representatives, where Wyoming, our smallest state in terms of population, is only going to have one. Okay? How they kind of determine that up is they divide it up geographically into different districts. Now, that doesn't mean all the districts are the same area, but all districts have about the same population. Okay, and I say about because there is some varying that goes on. So, for example, like Wyoming has only one congressional district; it's the entire state, but that district only has about 580,000 people in it, where the average is going to be 711,000. So you've got a decent chunk, 111,000, 125,000, whatever that number is, difference there between the average below. Some other states that the numbers don't work out quite so well, they don't have maybe 14,000, maybe they have 10, maybe they have 12,000. So they have a little bit more representation or a little bit less representation with this number. That number is going to kind of vary a little bit between it. But if you look at a particular state, you look at California or look at Michigan, all the congressional districts in there are going to have a pretty close number there. And that number, again, with the national average, is going to be somewhere around 711,000. Okay? And again, those are congressional districts. In terms of qualifications, to be a member of the House of Representatives, you have to win the election. But there's also some other constitutional qualifications that you can find in Article 1, Section 2. I would go ahead and get your copy of the Constitution out and highlight those, okay, because we're going to be coming back to those in class, and then I'll make it really easy to find them. Okay? Article 1, Section 2. But those qualifications are that you have to be at least 25 years old, that you have to be a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years, the past 7 years, and you have to be a resident of the state that you represent. Now, if you're reading along in the Constitution like you should be, you're going to notice that it doesn't actually say that word for word. It's kind of weird, especially the resident part, because you should not be a resident of the state that you represent. Well, look at the whole sentence, right? It starts off with a negative. It says a representative shall not. Okay? And then it ends all in one sentence. All of this is in one sentence here with that not. So you have what's called a double negative there. We don't use those anymore because they get really, really confusing. Essentially what happens is those two negatives, just like in math, cancel each other out and become a positive. So you have to be a resident of the state you represent. Okay? So if you're highlighting that in your Constitution, it might be a good idea to make a little note of that so you can have that for you moving forward. All right. Notice it says state, not congressional district. Okay. The Constitution requires that you only have to live in the state. So you could theoretically have somebody from Detroit area representing West Michigan. Practically, however, most states interpret that to be you're going to be living in the district that you represent, or at least you own a home in the district that you represent. Okay? Annual salary for a member of the House is $174,000. It sounds like a lot, but when you start to look at these are the people who are making decisions, you start to for a country in our future, and then you start to look at like what CEOs make. It's really not like that much. It is a lot of money for your average person. It's not a ton when you start to compare it to a lot of the other things in the market. Okay? They get their benefits other ways. Members of the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years, so they are constantly running re-election campaigns, and every time you have a federal election, you're going to be voting on your member of the House of Representatives. Okay? Additional powers for the House of Representatives, they have the power of impeachment. Impeachment gets really, really confusing for a lot of people. A lot of people have the misconception that impeachment is removing someone from office. That is not the case. Okay? Impeachment is a two-part process, just like a criminal trial. Okay, that's the analogy I like to use a lot. In a criminal trial, if you get charged with a crime, right, that doesn't mean you're guilty. You still have to go through the actual trial itself to determine guilt. Impeachment is the same kind of process. Okay, impeachment starts in the House, and who can be impeached? That's the president, the vice presidents, a lot of other federal positions that are made. The decisions are made, or who fills those offices are made by the president, and then confirmed by the Senate. Those can be impeached. Federal judges can be impeached. That's where the most majority of impeachments come from. But the impeachment process starts in the House, and impeachment essentially is bringing charges against. It's kind of like you're being charged with a crime. Okay? And then the process ends in the Senate. Why can you be impeached? You can find these in Article 2, Section 4. Make sure that you get those down. Okay? But there's 3 reasons. There's treason. Okay? Pretty self-explanatory. You betray your country. Yeah, probably shouldn't be serving in federal office. Okay? Bribery. You accept money to try and be influenced or to make a particular decision. Yeah, you probably shouldn't be in federal office. Okay? Those 2 are really, really clear. The last one is a little bit harder to define, right? High crimes and misdemeanors, and what does that actually look like? It's been interpreted to mean a number of different things. Some of it's just refusing to enforce the law. That's how President Johnson gets impeached. Lying under oath. That's how President Clinton gets impeached. Judges have been impeached and removed from office for things like being drunk on the bench. Very, very loose interpretations with what this means, and the vast majority of impeachments are going to probably be dealing with high crimes and misdemeanors. As I mentioned, there's 3 presidents that have been impeached, but we've had 4 presidential impeachments. It's because Johnson and Clinton were both impeached once; neither were removed from office. Trump was impeached twice, and he was acquitted both times on those. Okay. Again, I talked about those 2 steps. House has the power to impeach. In order to impeach, you only have a majority of votes. Well, the Senate is the one that's going to actually convict. And when you get a conviction, it's not a majority anymore. Now we are looking for a supermajority, a 2/3 vote for conviction. So it's a much higher level, and at that point, the individual is removed from office. The Senate can prohibit an individual from ever holding federal office again. There have been 19 impeachments so far in our history. So again, when you consider we've been around for almost 250 years, that's not a ton. That's not a lot. 7 of those have been convicted, though. So the most majority of impeachments haven't resulted in conviction. All 7 of those are federal judges. Okay? The most recent one was for bribery of a Colombian drug cartel, if I recall. Okay? Again, back to the presidents, Nixon a lot of times gets connected to impeachment because impeachment proceedings did start with Nixon, but he ends up resigning from office right before the whole Watergate scandal gets brought to the full House for an impeachment vote. So it gets through the first step of the impeachment process where it goes through the Judicial Committee, but it doesn't go through a full vote, so he doesn't actually get impeached at all. Now let's talk about the Senate. The Senate is the smaller of the 2 houses. It's currently made up of 100 members. That's because there are 50 states. Each state gets 2 senators. 2 times 50 is 100, right? So if we add more states, say Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C., that number is going to go up, right? Where in the House, it might not necessarily change. It might temporarily go up because those states need representatives, but when the next census comes, unless Congress ups the number, that number will probably go back to that 435. Okay? So the Senate is all going to be based on the number of states times 2. Okay? In Congress, the Senate is designed to reflect the will of the states. We talked about the House being representative of the will of the people. Okay? The Senate reflects the will of the states. So that's a kind of an important idea to understand, that the House is kind of the population body and representing the United States people, because each state has about the same, or each congressional district has about the same number of people living in it, where the Senate is designed to reflect the will of the states. Okay? Originally, senators were elected by their state legislatures, but now, after the 17th Amendment, senators are elected directly by the people. So we vote on senators. They go in cycles. So a senator serves a 6-year term, right? So they serve a 6-year term, but only about the third of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. So the way that works out is you tend to have senators. So like from Michigan, we'll have 2 years in a row or two 2-year elections, 2 elections in a row where we're going to be voting on on who our senator is going to be, and then we're going to take an election off because that's that other set of 2 years. No states usually have the same senators where you're voting for senators on the same time unless it's a special election. We had one of those in 2020 in Georgia where one was up for re-election, one was a special election. Democrats ended up winning both of those in 2020. Some of the qualifications, according to the Constitution, you can find those in Article 1, Section 3. Again, Article 1, Section 3 is all about the Senate. And it's written in pretty much the same language that the House is and except for there's some different requirements. So in the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old. So you have to be a little bit older. You have to be a citizen for at least the past 9 years. So you have to be a citizen longer than in the House. And you also must be a resident of the state that you represent. So again, I would highlight those, make a note here because it's the same kind of language. And just as in the House, the annual salary for a member of the Senate is $174,000. Senate, though, has a lot of additional powers that the House does not. And the biggest of those is the appointment power, being able to confirm presidential appointments. This gives the Senate a lot of influence, that the House just doesn't have. Because this is an important part of how our federal government runs. Right? A lot of those decisions are going to be made by the executive branch in enforcing the law. And in order to enforce the law, you have to have individuals there to actually do it. So the Senate is going to confirm a lot of the people who are going to be in charge of those areas. Some of those major appointments include cabinet members, heads and directors of federal agencies, and judicial nominees. All federal judges have to go through the nomination process and confirmation process. The president appoints, the Senate confirms. Amy Coney Barrett over here is the most recent Supreme Court judge who kind of went through right before the 2020 election. Confirmations always kind of follow the lawmaking process. You can find that in Article 1, Section 7. But it really begins in the appropriate committee. So like for federal judges, it starts in the Judicial Committee, and then it goes to the entire Senate. And those nominations can stall at either one of those spots. They also have treaty confirmation. Doesn't happen quite as often as appointment confirmation, but still another important power. A treaty is basically a formal agreement between two different nations. Really good example of that we like to use is the Treaty of Versailles during World War I. That's what this political cartoon is coming about. Here you've got the whole idea of Wilson's League of Nations and his 13 points, part of that, and the U.S. Senate then comes in and says, no, we're not going to ratify this because we don't want to get brought into another foreign war. So they refuse to ratify the actual Treaty of Versailles, which makes the League of Nations fall apart. Because it was the United States who was really the big idea, the big pusher behind that. This comes from Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, where the president can make treaties by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. So the Senate has to agree on that. Whenever a president negotiates a treaty with a foreign nation, he's often going to talk to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, because again, that's the committee, the smaller group of senators that deal with all of the foreign policy stuff that the Senate has power over. So he's going to talk to them because that's where the first stop that treaty is going to go. And then at that point, once the treaty is finalized, it goes to the Senate. They can confirm that treaty. They can reject it completely. They can offer to change it. They can say, hey, we're a little bit worried about this. Maybe change this. The Senate has a lot of power in that particular area, which means it's part of the reason why we don't see as many treaties made anymore. Instead, we have what are called executive agreements. We'll look more at those later on in the units. Both houses of Congress, though, have investigative powers, and this is the last power that we're going to talk about. Investigative powers are basically, they can investigate any matter that's related to their lawmaking power. Anything that falls within that lawmaking scope. This is also another one of those implied powers of Article 1, Section 1. And what that means is that they can gather information about what type of legislation would be a good idea to create. It can look at the different executive agencies and kind of oversee and investigate certain things. They can bring up an issue and talk about it because they want to focus public attention on a particular matter. They can expose the activities of questionable government officials, investigate those things further. All of these things fall within the scope of their investigative powers. Good over here, you have McCarthy from Wisconsin back during the Red Scare during the 1950s, where there were communists everywhere, right? With McCarthyism, that was all legal under Congress's investigative powers. Okay, that's everything for the virtual notes today. Make sure you have these ready to go for class, because we're going to be delving into a lot when it comes to the rest of the legislative branch. So I'll see you in class.